Good evening and very welcome to the Daily Rundown with me, Fiona Fox. Now tonight on the programme we'll be joined by musician Ian North, but before all that we're going to discuss the stories which have been making the news today. We're going to talk about Brussels, the US elections, UKIP suspending Suzanne Evans and plans for nuclear power plant to go ahead. But before all of that, let me introduce to you my lovely guest this evening. It's Mr. David Semple from the Jewish Media Agency. Hello David.
Nice to be
Haven't
back.
seen you in ages. I feel like it's been a very long time.
I know.
You've been busy.
I'm politicking.
Politicking, I see. But you're having
that TV show?
but you're having a night off, are you?
Oh, yeah. And
here.
tomorrow
Well, we'll
night
see.
I have a debate.
Right, okay, well let's see what we can do.
And I'm trying to do more writing now. I've been told to write more articles.
Very good, making use of your spare time.
Yeah.
And joining David on the couch this evening from the Green Party, it's Stephen Durrant.
Good evening, Fiona. Nice to meet you.
You're very welcome to be here because I know you've done the show before.
Yeah,
but
me and him.
And you guys
times.
have worked together, but not with me.
That's correct, yeah.
So it's a new combo.
Yeah.
Let's see how we get on there.
The best combo,
The
right?
best combo. Well, we'll see. Let's not be too ambitious. Right there. Setting ourselves up for a fall, maybe. Don't forget, you guys at home can also get involved with the programme. You can tweet us at the Daily Rundown at any point throughout the show. Now let's go to our first news story. Increasing the number of academy schools cost the coalition government much more than previously thought. That's the finding of an exclusive investigation for That's TV, which discovered how the extra expense came after the policy was last audited by spending watchdogs. It follows last week's budget announcement that all schools are to become academies within 5 years. Paul Faulkner explains why becoming an academy has often meant more than just a new name on the school gates. So we're just going to go to that video, just in case there's any quiet. There we go.
With one eye on marking their pupils' books and the other on balancing their own, schools are usually keen to find anything that gives them a financial boost. But when the coalition set about increasing the number of academies back in 2010, it sent out a message that if money was motivating schools to sign up, they would be disappointed. The new breed of academy would see nothing like the cash pumped into the few flagship institutions established under Labour. Yet the message, it seems, soon became mixed. Ian Woods is deputy head of a school which converted into an academy in 2012.
Did you ever feel there was a financial benefit to becoming an academy? Is that something that enticed you initially?
We'd heard that there was financial benefit to academisation. There is financial support to help you through the conversion process. It goes out in terms of fees and assistance that you need to convert legally. In terms of actual savings longer term, we've been able to save money that is hidden in costs of local authority based education.
Local authorities provide all kinds of services to their schools, everything from fixing the roof to teaching the flute, not to mention maintaining good standards. Until recently, councils took the cost out of a school's budget. But if a school became an academy, it got most of the money for itself and decided how to spend it. Local authorities, meanwhile, saw their own budgets cut, along with their responsibilities to the new academy. And if that sounds fair, there are those in local government who say it didn't deliver the promised parity between schools and academies.
What I was concerned about and what I expressed to Michael Gove when he was the Secretary of State was that there was definitely financial incentives going to schools to become academies. And my worry about that was that it was coming out of the overall education budget. It wasn't an extra source of funds. So schools that didn't become academies were suffering financially at the expense of those that were, which in my view was an intention to try and persuade head teachers and governing bodies to go down the academy route.
But for Ian Woods, any budgetary bonus was simply the result of his school's prudent spending.
We've had the freedom as an academy to shop around and get better value, and all of that money we've been able to invest back into the students. It's just the freedom to spend the school's resources on the children rather than spend it back to the local authority, and it's allowed us to have smaller classes and a broader curriculum. So there's not an overall financial gain.
How many units?
And that should have meant that there was no overall cost to the government. But the bill for academies was soon stacking up. The Department for Education tried to recoup the money given to academies from the councils which it said no longer needed it. More than £250 million was taken from them, but it still wasn't enough to neutralise the cost of academy expansion. It soon became clear that new money was leaking into the system to fund a policy whose true cost should have been close to zero.
That was the conclusion of this report from the National Audit Office back in 2012. It found that the difference between money paid to academies and clawed back from local councils was £350 million. That made it by far the biggest expense in the £1 billion cost of expanding the Academies programme in just the first 2 years of its operation. So, what happened next? Well, the flaws in the funding formula couldn't be fixed overnight, but the National Audit Office never revisited the subject.
So That's TV has been doing the sums. We discovered a consultation paper in which the government forecast academy funding for 2012 to 13, the final year of these arrangements. Only half the predicted academies opened, so let's assume the cost was halved as well, £290 million. We know that in the same year, the government took £169 million from councils to help cover the cost, but is also likely to have incurred around £40 million in unexplained expense, as it had done previously. Together with the National Audit Office figures for earlier years, that means a mechanism to give academies their fair share and nothing more potentially cost over £500 million. We showed our figures to the Department for Education, which declined to comment. Footing their part of the bill hit councils hard, according to the National Union of Teachers.
In areas where a great many schools have academised, they've actually had to academise because their local authority has been cut to the bone. Support services cut to almost the point of non-existence, at which point actually there's no benefit to not being an academy. And so this is something where people's arms have been twisted, or the position has been forced on them through circumstance.
The initial budgetary benefits of becoming an academy and the burden that placed on local authorities and the government itself may well have been accidental, a result of what the Department for Education admits was a complicated calculation. But the fact that these potential perks remained in place until just last year was definitely by design.
A new flat rate was introduced for schools and academies in 2013, but for the past 2 years, academies have had their payments topped up by around £30 per pupil. That's TV has calculated the cost to be over £130 million. So, with funding finally equalised this year, what's been the cost of turning over 5,000 schools into academies? Adding the National Audit Office figures prior to 2012 to our calculations for the years since gives a grand total of almost £1.3 billion, a third of $1 billion more than when the watchdog last looked at the books. Again, we wanted to speak to the Department for Education about our findings, but our request for comment went unanswered.
Maybe the price tag shouldn't come as such a surprise. Big structural reform of any public service rarely comes cheap. But the cost of individual schools getting a bounce in their budgets for becoming academies shouldn't have to be factored in. That's because it's the one thing which ministers repeatedly said they wouldn't get. And yet it's still taken 5 years for the financial playing field between those schools which chose to convert and those which did not to be finally levelled.
Paul Faulkner, That's TV.
Paul Faulkner reporting there. Now, Stephen, so I know one of the many strings to your bow is teaching.
Yes.
What do you make of all that then?
Well, it's an excellent article, first of all, and congrats to Spats Manchester on the exclusive and for winding up the Department of Education enough for them to not bother to respond to your investigation.
That stood out, didn't it, though?
Yeah.
Not at any point. No
we're not going to
at any
speak to you
point.
about that.
Yeah.
It's another facet of a disastrous policy. I'm just going to rewind a bit and not to sort of go on about a bugbear, but when I was growing up, I don't know about you, but we had these things called schools, and you went to a school, and the kids went to the school, and the teachers taught in the schools, and that was fine. You knew what a school was, even if it had problems. But down the years, you couldn't be a school anymore. You had to be a beacon of a flagship, of a specialist something or other, or an academy or something. And they mix up all these words to make it sound like it was a choice, as if 11s and 12-year-olds already know that they want to work in this, that, the other. And so the academies became part of this whole choice thing. But now, of course, there's no choice at all. It's going to be foisted.
It'll be implemented.
And this extra money's been awarded to academies. And yet when everyone has to be one, you can't award extra money above, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The differential isn't going to be there anymore. So it looks to me like basically a shambolic policy, and you've just highlighted another angle of the shambolic nature of it, which is opposed by teachers. It's parents are sceptical. It doesn't improve results. It's driven by ideology. It's driven by a desire to allow corporations to start to conglomerate state assets, like what's happening with the NHS. And where's the extra money going? Well, it's not going to teachers' wages and conditions, because you can use unqualified teachers. It's not going to the bottom end, because I already hear people who work in academies complaining about the lack of resources at the bottom end. But whereas a head teacher used to perhaps get perhaps 80, 90, 100,000 pounds a year, something in that region, now they're acting like execs on 300,000 pounds a year, and it's a corporatisation of education. And forget, such 70s liberal kind of ideology as like actually educating children for life or even skills or anything like that. It's just become another racket. That's how it looks, and I think you've just exposed another angle on it.
Brilliant. Well, I think we'll come back to this one. We're going to go for our first break, because there's still quite a lot more to talk about on that one, and I'll come back to you, David, on that as well. We're going to go for a quick break. Join us. We've lots more news and a very special musical guest coming up as well. See you soon.